Transgender 101, almost everything you need to know about the transgender community. Transgender, of relating to or being a person who identifies with or expresses a gender identity that differs from the one which corresponds to the person's sex at birth. What does it mean to be transgender? There are so many different ways people can describe the word transgender. The word transgender is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity differs from what is typically associated with the sex they were assigned at birth. That's as simple and straightforward as it gets. First things first, being transgender has nothing to do with sexuality at all. Gender and sexuality are completely different things. Transgender people can be gay, straight, bisexual, and everything in between. Gender identity is one's innermost concept of self as male, female, a blend of both, or neither. How individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. One's gender identity can be the same or different from their sex assigned at birth. Sexual orientation is an inherent or immutable, enduring, emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. Biological sex refers to the designation of a person at birth as either male or female based on their anatomy and/or their biology.
So what does gender mean to you?
Well, I think part of the reason that we didn't arrive at an answer is because gender is so specific and individual.
Gender to me is what someone is, just what they self-identify as, like what you feel like in your head.
I feel like gender is this sausage casing. Like our body might be in this gender, but what's inside when it comes out of this casing may not be expressing the casing.
Gender's kind of a bullshit social construct. It sells a lot of clothes, it lets people have men's and women's deodorant. When it comes down to it, it's just marketing.
Most people don't have to question their gender or even give it a second thought. But if you're a person who's trans or gender nonconforming, i.e. someone who doesn't feel like they're male or female, then you have to give it more thought because your brain is telling you this one thing and your body is exhibiting something else.
So what is transgender?
Transgender is an umbrella term that basically houses people who feel that their experienced gender is different from the one that was assigned at birth. And that's not dependent on medical or hormonal transition.
And gender is constructed. This pink is girl, this blue is boy.
They should put all these kids in green and yellow because you don't know. No one knows until, I don't know, till it comes out.
For me personally, as a trans person, it was like I felt male and never felt comfortable female.
I don't feel like I'm a girl and I don't feel like I'm a boy, but I feel like I kind of have everything inside of me.
You were born as a male.
Yes, I was born male.
Is that like an okay thing
Yeah,
for
no,
me
it's
to
totally
say?
an okay thing to say just because it's straight from the horse's mouth. And yeah, I was born male, I identify as female, but if people, want to see me any other way, that's on them.
Treat a trans person as you would anyone else. It's not about special needs, it's just like a special set of circumstances around their needs. So I would say don't make any assumptions.
The transgender umbrella encompasses any individual who crosses over or challenges their society's traditional gender roles and expressions. There's not just one type of trans. Just like sexuality, gender is a spectrum. People can be on one end of the spectrum, perfectly in the middle, or more towards another end. It doesn't really matter.
I'm trans, but I'm not confused.
I'm trans, but I'm not your punching bag.
I am trans, but I am not tricking men into having sex with me. I don't need to.
I'm trans, but I'm not just a butch woman.
But I'm not damaged.
But I'm not scary.
But I'm not a freak.
But I am not desperate for attention.
But I'm not going to hell.
But I am not your fetish.
But I'm not estranged from my family.
But I'm not to be played with.
But I'm not gonna police your politics.
But I'm not a criminal.
But I am not the best of both worlds.
But I've never actually seen RuPaul's Drag Race.
I am trans, but I'm not ashamed.
Being transgender doesn't mean someone has had SRS, or that they want to. If they have, fabulous. If they haven't, great. It's none of your business. Someone's private parts are their private parts, which means they're none of your business. It's 100% inappropriate to ask someone about that unless they chose to give you that information. Having SRS or not doesn't discount the fact that someone is trans. Many trans people don't get SRS because they don't want it, because it's major surgery, or for many people, they can't afford it. It's important to ask questions if you don't understand things, but be respectful. There's no right way to be trans. Everyone is different, everyone comes out differently, everyone identifies differently, everyone looks different, but everyone who identifies as trans is trans.
I go by she, her, and hers pronouns. That's just how it's been for me.
My pronoun is he, and I present as a he. Some trans people might look like me and present as a she.
Recently, I've come across they, and I like they. So you can refer to me either as she or they.
I like to be referred to as many things. It's really about what sort of feels good to our ears when we hear it.
Pronouns are important because they indicate a degree of respect. Who doesn't want to be respected?
For a long time, a lot of people have felt like that they don't fit into the mold of primarily he or primarily she, or maybe they feel they're a blend of both and that there's not really a word for that.
I found out about gender non-specific pronouns ze and here, and I thought that was funny. That makes people trip up, because really technically I'm not a she. I'm not a he either.
There are some situations where we really put way too much stock into whether or not somebody is a man or a woman. There's a lot of situations that we just don't need to necessarily have gendered language. If you're unsure about somebody's pronoun, pull them aside and ask, hey, what are your pronouns?
It's not even preferred pronoun, because it is their pronoun.
So some people go by he, some people go by she, some people actually use the pronoun they.
You can avoid mistakes by just saying them, theirs, they.
Their gender is still valid regardless of whether or not you understand it.
Misgendering a person by using an incorrect pronoun is an act of disrespect.
Everybody else in the world out there can say, I am, and they identify themselves, and everybody believes them. But when I say I am, I don't know why people just don't believe us.
The bathroom is often the start of trans people experiencing violence out in the world. Public bathrooms are never enjoyable, but for transgender people and many others, using a public bathroom can be a highly stressful and even dangerous experience. Gender dysphoria is clinically significant distress caused when a person's assigned birth gender is not the same as the one with which they identify. Almost all transgender people experience dysphoria at some point in their life. People don't wake up one morning and say, I think I'm going to be transgender. That's not how it works. Being trans is something that people struggle with for years, and a lot of times it takes a long time to come to terms with. Transgender people are people that truly feel in their soul they are not the gender they were born assigned to. It is extremely dangerous for trans people to come out, transition, and live their life being trans. Don't be ignorant to the issues trans people face every day. Being trans is dangerous. LGBT people are more than twice as likely as Blacks or Jews to be attacked in a violent hate crime. They are more than 4 times as likely as Muslims to be attacked in these crimes. Transgender women who survive hate attacks are 6 times more likely to experience physical violence when interacting with the police than are other gay, lesbian, or bisexual survivors. 7 transgender women of color were murdered in the United States during the first 2 months of this year. 41% of transgender and gender non-conforming people have attempted suicide, compared to the 1.6% of all people that have tried to take their own lives. The level of violence targeting transgender people, particularly transgender women of color, is a national crisis that the LGBT movement has a responsibility to confront, said the Human Rights Campaign President Chad Griffin. This issue reveals how far we still have to go in order to ensure that all members of the LGBT community have equal access to basic dignity and fair treatment. The May 2014 cover of Time magazine read, "The Transgender Tipping Point," with actress Laverne Cox on the cover. Laverne Cox is one of the faces of the transgender rights movement, a movement that Time calls America's next civil rights frontier. Laverne Cox is the first transgender person to be on the cover of Time magazine. Earlier this year, she became the first transgender person to be nominated for an Emmy. Most importantly, she is giving this movement power by telling her story and giving a voice to the transgender community. The transgender community has many faces of youth, celebrity, and activism. While we often see transgender people as adults, people are transgender throughout their whole lives.
What it's like to be transgender. This is America. Population 318 million. If all these little plastic people were the population, the total trans population would be this person. That's about 0.3% of the US population, and they're facing an uphill battle. A survey of nearly 6,500 transgender people in 2008 revealed the trans population was unemployed at twice the rate of the general population. Those rates are doubled for transgender people of color. Almost half, 47%, said that they were fired, not hired, or denied a promotion because of being transgender. And 90% said that they faced some form of discrimination just because of their gender identity. As a result of this, 71% hide their gender or gender transition. Discrimination doesn't stop at work either. Now let's talk about housing. Transgender people have less than half the national rate of home ownership. 32% compared to the 67% of the general population that owns their own home. 19%, or nearly 1/5 of transgender people, have been homeless at some point. The housing situation is bad, but healthcare may be worse. Hormone therapy or certain surgeries to change physical characteristics are only covered by Medicaid in 7 states. And 19% of trans people had been denied healthcare based on their sexual identity. Because of all these problems, a lot of the trans community has turned to alcohol and drugs. They had 70% more drinking and drug problems to cope with mistreatment. And in terms of incarceration, trans people were 85% more likely to be imprisoned over people who hadn't lost their jobs due to bias. And then there's this. 41% of the transgender population in the US has attempted suicide, compared to just 4.6% of the general population. So think about that the next time you think gender identity is a choice.
The trans community greatly needs allies and support in order to keep them safe. Some things to remember to be an ally for the transgender community are that you can't tell if someone is trans just by looking at them. Don't make assumptions about a trans person's sexual orientation. If you don't know what pronouns to use, listen first, then ask. Understand the differences between coming out as lesbian, bisexual, gay, etc., and coming out as trans. Respect the terminology a trans person uses to describe their identity. Be patient with a person who is questioning or exploring their gender identity. Challenge anti-transgender remarks or jokes in public spaces. Be respectful and loving above everything else, and open-minded, and remember that this community needs your help.